In anything that man ever does, there's some element of risk, right?
Hey guys, in this video we're going to be taking a look at two cooling solutions for an overclock on the Ryzen 5000 series. Now, if you watch my previous video on Curve Optimiser in Ryzen Master, you will have a good idea of where we're starting off. I'll have a link to that video in the description, but basically we looked at a number of different overclocks using the new technique, which is Curve Optimiser in Ryzen Master, and using traditional techniques. What I want to do is to go a little bit further in this one to look at what happens when you change the cooling solution, the cooling system for the PC. We're going to be taking a look at two different coolers and what results we got in terms of performance and temperature. But before that, this video is sponsored by the membership for this channel. Click on the join button. There are several membership levels to choose from. Choose whichever one suits your requirements and gain access to exclusive perks and exclusive member-only videos. Now, we're going to start off here inside of Ryzen Master, which is the most sensible place to start. We have the controls here. I think I've got Curve Optimiser enabled, and this time around we're using the per core Curve Optimiser. Now, the other overclocks that I had in the previous video, we had one at 4500. That one is a pretty decent overclock. I've got it here at 1.3875 volts. Now that setting there produces fairly high temperatures, but most of the time the temperatures are going to be under 80 Celsius. I'm fine with that. It may creep into 80 Celsius from on occasion. All the cores are at 4500 at 1.3875 volts. Does get pretty hot, but it is bearable. It's not extreme. The second overclock that we looked at last time was the 4000 undervolt. So this is an undervolt with a voltage of 1.16875 volts. Now that voltage is much lower than the stock voltage, and stock voltage can go up to about 1.45, but it's typically around 1.25. Here we've got a much lower voltage. We get lower temperatures, one of the main benefits of lower voltages, and we don't get as much performance, but the performance is good enough. We lose about 10% of performance, but we get lower temperatures. That means we can run the fans quite a lot lower. I really like this setting for the amount of noise it produces. We can run this undervolt on the hottest days of the year. It will give us very good temperatures inside the case. The other overclock that we had was an insane one. It was like 4725, and that overclock, I was terrified of actually testing that one because of the temperatures that we were going to get. Here we've got a modified version of that, and you can see it's massively modified. We've got the star core 4650. That's 50 meg. Remember the Ryzen, well, on the Ryzen 7 5700G, we have a base clock of 3800 Hertz. We have a boost clock of 4600. Here we've managed to go 50 Hertz above the boost. And look what we've got there on the second core, the second fastest core, the one with the circle. We've got 4600. That is exactly the boost clock. The other guys are much slower. Now we know that these guys can go up to 4500 because we had them at 4500 at 1.38 plus volts. However, just to get from 4500 to 4650, I had to increase the voltage by a huge amount. The consequence of that is pretty, and here we can get into the kind of like the reward risk ratios, the kind of looking at what sort of benefits you're getting from an overclock against what the costs are of the overclock. This guy here runs very hot, and I had to reduce the frequencies on 4 of the cores to this minuscule 4000. That's like the undervolt. this could be running a lot cooler, except I need to support these two guys at 46 and 4650. So just to increase the frequency from 4500 to 4650, we had to do a massive increase in voltage, leading to insanely high temperatures. Now, temperatures are a pain. You know, it's an indication you're using up energy, which is good, but you can use energy efficiently or inefficiently. This is highly inefficient. This is just going to burn the CPU. It's going to probably reduce the life of the CPU. If we went above this voltage, that would be not a... I don't want to use this particular overclock. It's just not powerful enough for the amount of voltage we're putting in. If I try to increase the frequency above 4650, no voltage will support that. There comes a point with any overclock where you just cannot stabilize the system by increasing voltage. You're just going to get more and more temperature. The relationship between voltage and temperature is an essential one, because as you increase the voltage, you will get higher temperatures regardless of frequency. And if you reduce the voltage, the temperatures will fall, but there comes a point where the benefits of reducing the voltage are really not that significant. So there's always a reward risk assessment to make. High temperatures bad, high voltages very bad. You want to find a sweet spot. For me, the sweet spot, as I said in the previous video, precision boost overdrive. I don't like the noise it generates, but it, generally speaking, produces a very good overclock. And I usually used to turn off precision boost overdrive because I did not like the noise. I did not like the temperatures. But here we've got this very high single core performance here of 4650, very poor, very poor multi-core performance because of these 4 cores running at 4000. But if I put it much higher than that, the frequencies multiplied by the voltage, we get insane temperatures. I wouldn't even use this particular overclock, but if we were to increase the frequencies, we'll get insane temperatures. So unusable. Nice to experience something like this to see what kind of performance we can get, but completely unusable on a day-to-day basis. To try to get something better than this, I would have to go down the reward path of actually purchasing a more expensive CPU. So I'd spend $100 getting maybe a 5900X, which would cost more, but I'm not running a huge risk. I can run it at stock faster than this CPU, severely overclocked. So this overclock, not usable, but the other one's perfectly fine. Then we get to Curve Optimiser, probably the thing I would recommend right now in terms of Ryzen Master. Ryzen Master is awesome in terms of the fact that it can generate an all cores Curve Optimiser, which we looked at last time. And this time I went for per core. Now the per core optimizer has an option where you can just play it as an auto offset, and it will give you this kind of situation where you've got the cores automatically calculated. You start optimizing, it takes about an hour and a half. Then you can go ahead and just play around with the difference offset value. You can increase that to try to play around with the settings here to regain stability if you have poor stability. Once you are if you use the per core setting, choosing manual offset allows you to go ahead and change the offsets for each and every core. So that's something that can take a bit of time to get right, and you can validate the results that you get using the validate offset button here. Now, what we've got with this guy is a per core curve optimized overclock. This guy here runs very cool, like the all cores overclock. Both of these guys run very cool. The temperatures are fantastic. We're getting very high performance, almost record performance, using the Curve Optimiser. So I would recommend trying out this first. You're not necessarily going to get the same results as I get on my system, but with Ryzen Master, it's just so quick. It takes an hour to establish, an hour and a half to establish the the offset or the initial values, and then you can run the offsets over as long a period of time as you wish for the per core. Now, in my experience, the old cores actually produced a more performative result. It was actually higher performance with the old cores, but for the test that I ran, we actually ran those tests using the per core. Now, the first cooler that we used was the Hyper 212 Black Edition from CoolerMaster. This is a mid-range cooler. It comes in at about $40. There's an RGB one, which is about $50. So with this guy, it's got a good reputation. It's been around for quite a long while. And the nice black, sort of almost industrial feel to it. I like that. The point of sale, unique selling point, not exactly unique. It has direct contact, which allows the heat pipes to contact the actual CPU. Now, with this bad boy, I don't know what the TDP is, but I do know it is very effective. We're going to find out. It's a very, very effective cooling solution. One thing I really like about it is the mounting. So you've got these, I think maybe we can see them a little bit closer here. You've got these mounts here where these screw into the motherboard, and they have these sort of spring-loaded screws. So you can really tighten. There's 4 of them, allowing you to get a really tight grip on the CPU, and ensuring that you've got the best possible connection between the cooler, the bottom of the cooler, with the heat pipes there, and the top of the CPU. This thing is over-engineered. It's very effective at cooling. A little bit difficult to install. You need to take off the back plate, and you need to install this little thing here on the AMD. And I believe also on the Intel, you have exactly the same situation where you have to remove the back plate. But that's a little bit complicated. Otherwise, apart from removing the back plate, which you got to store away somewhere safely, because you might need to use it later. Now, the recommendation with these guys is that you install them outside of the case. So you put the motherboard somewhere outside of the case and install this. You can actually do it inside the case, but it's a little bit more tricky, but it is possible. And now the size of this is 15.88 centimeters. So you will need a fairly large case to actually be able to accommodate this. They don't mention the TDP, but they do mention the noise level of 26 decibels. That's very reasonable. It is noticeable at full speed, but 26 decibels is not overly, it's not too loud. Now, the other one we're looking at is this guy. This is the Be Quiet Dark Pro 4. This guy is massive. It's about twice the size of the other one that we're looking at, and it has this big bulk. It has got these cutaways for the memory. However, if you have a very tall memory, I think you may struggle with this bad boy. It does like a large case like the previous one. I think this one is 16.2 centimeters, 16.3 centimeters. And you do get the option, well, it's not an option, you do get 2 fans inside of the case. Now the fans, there's a smaller one and there's a larger one. This one, once again, they do recommend installing it outside of the case. That center fan can be a little bit difficult to install once you have everything, once the motherboard is actually attached to the case. It is possible to install everything whilst it's all in the case, but it's just a little bit difficult. Now, one thing I'll say about this particular cooler, I like it, but it has got a very, very industrial feel to it. You know, if you, in the case, there's no RGB. I don't think there's an RGB option for this case, for this cooler at all. And yeah, really nice TDP, 250 watts. Remember, we're dealing with the 5700G at 65 watts without overclocking, so this gives us plenty of headroom. It does cost about twice as much as the other, not exactly twice as much, it costs about $30 more than the other one. Very heavy piece of equipment. The fans are beautiful. They run quiet. The decibel rating is 24 decibels, 24.6 decibels. In actual use, I did not notice any real difference in the amount of noise generated by the Be Quiet and the CoolerMaster. They sounded about as loud one as the other. The one thing I was a little bit apprehensive about was this guy here. This is the, use this to hold the cooler. Cooler weighs, about a kilo. You use this and a couple of screws to screw this to hold it in place on one of the brackets. It's not the most convincing arrangement. It does work very well, but initially I was a little bit concerned of just having two ordinary screws going in there, holding that in place. You got to get that nice and tight for it to work properly. One thing I like about Be Quiet is that their customer services are very good. They give you inside the case, you also get some coolant, the thermal paste. Now the thermal paste, I would recommend using the thermal paste that you get with the cooler, particularly if you're dealing with a very high quality cooler like this one. About $75. The paste itself is pretty good quality, much better than the kind of stuff you get from Amazon. The kind of $5 stuff you get from China. So moving on to the all-important scores for the two different coolers. We can see here there was a difference between the Be Quiet and the CoolerMaster, where the Be Quiet actually got higher all-cores performance than the CoolerMaster. The difference was somewhat slight, but it might be significant. I ran the test 3 times over, but I think maybe with more tests, we might have more significant results. With the fastest thread test, we didn't see a significant difference between the CoolerMaster and the Be Quiet. And that is what was expected. There was no way that temperature was going to be an issue for the fastest thread. When it came to the CPU temperature, we did see a significant difference between Be Quiet and CoolerMaster. Now, the difference you're seeing there gives the Be Quiet cooler higher scores because it was cooler, and the CoolerMaster produced higher temperatures and therefore it got lower scores. The way that's calculated is that 100 is given to the lowest. We then reduce all the way up to the TJ max, which would be a 0. So 100 was 61 Celsius, and the highest temperature was actually about 4 Celsius higher than that. Now, this may have impacted the all cores test because there may have been some thermal throttling taking place there, with the Be cooler actually doing better when it was thermal throttled than the CoolerMaster because it would have had less thermal throttling than the CoolerMaster. So it's possible that under certain conditions, having the Be Quiet cooler will actually give better performance, but you have to be really pushing the CPU to get that difference in results. So I would say that if you use your CPU to a point where it is getting very high temperatures on a relatively frequent basis, perhaps the Be Quiet cooler might actually give you a better result and be worth that extra $30 that you're paying for it. But otherwise, they do give fairly similar results most of the time, and I don't think, in terms of the acoustics, which is really what matters to me, I think they sound about the same. So I'm not by any means concerned with the performance of the CoolerMaster. I think it's well worth the $40 or $50 you might pay for that one. When it comes to the overall recommendation, though, I think because the CoolerMaster is a much more compact, much more lightweight device, I think it's probably the one that I would recommend, because even though it's a fairly tall device at 15.88 centimeters, it will fit more comfortably in a wider range of cases, and it will actually allow you to access your memory much more easily. You can easily slip off the fan, take out the memory, and then put the fan on again once you've put in new memory. I think that gets a little bit difficult with the Be Quiet one. But if you're going for a long-term build and you don't need to worry about taking memory in and out, the Be Quiet one is perfect. It will give you good performance, and it's going to last all the way. It will be able to handle the kind of TDP that we're seeing with the AM5 chips, with the new AM5 socket chips that should be coming out fairly soon. even when those are overclocked, I think it should have the ability to handle those. Although I think some of those chips, if you have a very strong overclock with the AM5 chips, some of them might actually require something more powerful than this. They might require a very powerful 360 liquid cooler. We'll have to wait and see, but if I was going for a build that was going to be upgraded at some point to an AM5 socket, I would be taking the Be Quiet with me rather than the CoolerMaster. I would want something with a bit more power behind it for cooling than the CoolerMaster. Otherwise, CoolerMaster is almost as good in most conditions, except maybe very, very hot conditions where that extra capacity to cool of the Be Quiet may be worth it. But for most users, I think the CoolerMaster is going to be just fine.